get lost back there?
I think I just got nervous, so I didn't know when I was supposed to start walking.
Yeah, it's when I introduced you. That's we can try that again if you'd like. So here's how this is going to go. Those of you who have been here before, you know this. I'm going to do an introduction for the video with UCSD TV. I'm going to introduce Rebecca. I'm going to say, Rebecca, Kuang, welcome to the Writers' Symposium. You do that same wild applause when I say that. And then when we're all done, and I say, Rebecca Kuang, thank you for being part of the Writers' Symposium, you do it again. Okay? Everybody know what they're doing? Yeah. All right. So, we ready? We haven't actually done anything yet, so hang on to those whoops. Welcome to the 30th Annual Writers' Symposium by the Sea, a bonus edition at Point Loma Nazarene University. I'm Dean Nelson, I'm the journalism faculty at the school, and with us tonight is Rebecca Kuang, award-winning author, scholar, professional student, whose books The Poppy War, Yellowface, Babel, and now Katabasis are all bestsellers. Rebecca Kuang, welcome to the Writers' Symposium. Apparently you brought the whole family. Very nice. I want to start with a statement from your acknowledgments page on the Poppy War, Book 1. You thank someone for transforming you from being a person who liked to write into a person who is a writer. What did that person do, and what's the difference?
Who was it?
I'll tell you if you want. Did you want to know?
I do. I have a good guess. I think it might be Jean Cavellis, one of my writing instructors at Odyssey Workshop, but it does inform my answer. Who
yeah, that is.
Okay, great. Yeah. It's been many years since I turned in that acknowledgement.
But what did she do?
Okay, well, it's a bit of a long story. After I wrote The Poppy War, and I started writing that manuscript when I was 19, and I had no creative writing education under my belt. I went to college to study international economics. That did not go so well. It went so badly, I took a gap year to figure out my life. So I had, I was just kind of figuring out writing as I was going along, reading books, studying craft from close reading, and really just going to Google and typing in things like, what is a plot? How do you structure a plot?
Seriously, you wrote a book by Googling how to write a book?
Yes, and that's The Poppy War. So after that manuscript was done, that summer I applied to this fantastic program called the Odyssey Writing Workshop. I think it's totally virtual now, but at the time it was this 6-week workshop in New Hampshire, and it's all taught by Jean Cavellis, who is brilliant. She used to be an editor for many years, and then she switched to teaching the craft of writing, and that was a transformative summer because it was when writing went from this very instinctive, subjective thing to a craft with clearly defined rules and guidelines and kind of like a scientific method for thinking about how you compel a reader and keep them hooked throughout a story. So yeah, I think that's when I transitioned from just being somebody who knew when I got excited by words and when a passage was working, to somebody who could determine exactly what made that passage work.
Is it also true that you Googled how to find an agent?
Yes. So I asked Google, like, how do you publish a book? And Google said, get a literary agent. And then I asked, who are some literary agents? And on the first page, there was a list of 10 people who represent speculative fiction. So I went down the list and I emailed them all, and the first person who responded is still my agent today.
Wow, that's exciting. So really, you didn't know what you were doing?
No.
Wow. I think I read in the New Yorker piece about you where you would also send chapters, was it to your dad, and just say, is this anything? How did that go?
Yeah, me and Charles Dickens are the same. We were writing serial fiction. But how it happened was I had like a very rough draft of the entire novel, and then I was going through and cleaning up chapters one by one, but at that point I had worked on it for a while with no eyes on it, and I really just wanted to show somebody, like anybody, that what I'd been working on all this time. So I sent chapters one by one to my father as I finished them, and I mean, he's the perfect reader. Like, he only had praise and no criticism, and it was just this sheer like enthusiasm that kept me going. Whenever I finished a chapter, he would say, "This is so awesome, I love what you did here, I can't wait to find out what happens next." And I did a project on serial fiction earlier in grad school, and there's an interesting effect where when you have a reader hanging on your every word, you start to structure chapters so that they end in cliffhangers, and each chapter is also its own complete story arc because your reader gets them in installments. That's not how I write now, but that's why the Poppy War is a little episodic, because it wasn't just that I wanted my dad to enjoy the whole thing as a work of art, but every few days I wanted him to get that little burst of excitement. So yeah, it both encouraged me to finish the manuscript, but I think that serial format has a profound effect on the craft and pacing.
Okay. So, and I'm going to ask you about Katabasis, but is it Katabasis? Katabasis? I hear everybody saying it, however.
And they can say it however they like.
How do you say it?
I say Katabasis.
Katabasis, we'll go with that. So, in Katabasis, you set the main character's inner conflict early on. And this is what she wonders. This is what the Alice character wonders. Would she rather graduate, produce brilliant research, and go out in a blaze of glory? Or would she rather live out her natural lifespan, gray-haired and drooling, fading into irrelevance, consumed by regret? Are those really our only two choices?
Well, I think your hair looks very nice. It's a book about obsession and distortion, and it's not a perspective I share, but I'm trying to capture this all-consuming passion for academic achievement that you can feel at the start of grad school, and near the end of my grad program, I really live for long walks on the beach. I think fading into irrelevance and eating cake every day sounds very nice, but without giving too much of the book away, it's very much an exploration of transitioning from somebody who would burn up for that single moment of glory to somebody who is learning to look up and behold the stars.
Wow. So this main character, I mean, she's so interesting. She's so desperate for validation from her professor, a person who abused her and objectified her, and whom she may have killed, that she is willing to shorten her own life, descend into hell with no guarantee she'll find her way out, all so she can get a letter of recommendation from him.
I think the letter of the recommendation is a MacGuffin, but this book really is about student-teacher relationships and all the ways in which they can go wrong. And everything he just said is not a spoiler. This is all in the first chapter. But I think about this a lot because I've been a student for a lot of my life, but for the past few years I've been transitioning from the student to the teacher. These days, most of the time when I enter a classroom, I'm at the front of the classroom. I wrote the syllabus, I prepared the lecture, and I no longer feel like so close in age with my undergraduates, and that's really nice. Like, I think in my mid-20s I'd be like, I hope they respect me, but now they call me old, which...
That's harsh.
I don't know. One of them wrote in his course eval. Like, Professor Kuang was fantastic. She did not mind when we made fun of her age and the fact that she doesn't know slang like what "op" means. So I'm thinking about, you know, how to be a good teacher, and I'm thinking about that, like that intimacy and the spark that you feel in the classroom and how you make the most of that pedagogically. But there's all these potentials for abuse. And has anybody here seen the Damien Chazelle film Whiplash?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, it's a fantastic film.
Brutal. It's a brutal book. Brutal movie.
Yeah, brutal film. It's about a drumming student played by Miles Teller who has a similarly like toxic but intense relationship with his music teacher, who is abusive physically, emotionally, verbally. Like, he throws cymbals at his head, he makes him practice until his hands bleed, he berates him in public. And Miles Teller's character, he can't quit. Like, he always comes crawling back. He believes that in order to be the best musician, the best drummer he can be, he needs Fletcher, this teacher. And so I was thinking about not just what makes a professor abusive like that, but what explains the student who chooses to stay. And in Alice's case and in Peter's case, it's a sadly familiar logic. Like, you stay because you get used to it, and at some point you think you deserve the abuse, and also it makes you special, that you've been singled out for this mistreatment. And you also think, only by going through this can I become the best possible scholar. So it's a very complicated and sad and unquittable relationship they have with Grimes.
Well, and you've spent so much time in grad school, and I mean, in languages and philosophy and literature, and you portray it in such these dire, bullying, narcissistic, kind of cult-like ways. I'm reading this and I'm thinking, but this is where you've spent almost half your life. Why do you keep going back?
Well, I'm like Alice, I can't quit. Well, I will say I am very blessed with my PhD advisor. Actually, my entire committee is women of color, and that's really cool. The last time we were all in a room together, I had just passed my qualifying exams, and I got quite emotional, like seeing not just one, but 3 possible role models who could teach me how to navigate this world and hold myself with dignity and never like cower to anybody. Like, that's really cool. So they're a big part of why I'm able to stay. But I also think if you love something, then you want to make it better, and like somebody's gonna be in that classroom and somebody will be advising students, and if everybody leaves, then you just have people like Grimes there. So I want to be the good teacher that the students like benefit from.
Yeah, I'm sure you are, and I'm sure you will continue to be. I do think that the difficulty that this Alice character, and really other characters like in Babel and Rin, just in the whole education process, your ability to stay out of the mental health issues that those characters have done, you were able to do that because you were able to write and tell stories and address those things. Would you say that mental health was actually one of the things that was driving you to tell these great stories?
I think so. I mean, writing helps. I'm also in therapy, and I started seeing this fantastic therapist just this year because I used to get like panic attacks going on tour, and now I don't. Now I just draw very fat round birds in a sketchbook, and it's great. It keeps me very calm. I do think there is a really therapeutic effect to chronicling difficult emotion. there's something I always do whenever I'm experiencing an intense feeling, good or bad, where I kind of split my psyche, and there's the me that is undergoing, let's say, grief. I've been dealing with a lot of grief recently, so there's the me that is grieving, and then like part of myself kind of floats outside and is just very curious and detached and observant, and that part of me is asking, oh, this is really interesting. How would we turn this feeling into language so that we could use it in a book later? It's not so crudely utilitarian as that. They're just really seeking to articulate all this feeling in a way that I can apprehend. So the part of me is thinking, like, where does this emotion sit in the body? Like physically, like where in the chest is the grief? Like how is the crying working? Like where does it start? Does it start with the breathing? When does the crying turn into like dry hiccuping? What's the purpose of that? And then I write all that down at the moment that I am still experiencing the emotion, and it usually calms me down. Mostly it helps to make me intelligible to myself. And then I put that in a book and then inflict it on a lot of other people. So I think the writing doesn't make the hard times easier, but it does give me a map of everything that was swirling through my mind, and it makes me feel less like my head's going to explode.
Sure. The Professor Grimes character is so problematic in this book, and he says this to Alice regarding the challenge of her succeeding in grad school. He says to her, you don't talk like them, you don't look like them, and your research doesn't fit what they're looking for. You will always have to perform twice as well for half the acclaim. You have no room for mistakes. Is that the message? That's not the message you're getting now based on what you just said about your committee, but was that the message you were getting early on in your academic career?
No, I went to college in 2013. Alice was doing her programs in the 1980s, so that is historicizing her situation. Again, like I've just been so lucky with mentors who look like me and show me a path forward for what I want to do.
So, but to continue that, later you have the character thinking it seemed like the best way for her to prove that women were not just inferior was to just not be inferior. Is it that simple?
No, Alice is a very bad feminist. I'm glad you bring that up though, because I was trying to contextualize how somebody might think about their own gender and how they're supposed to behave because of that in the 80s. The 80s are an interesting period to me. My editor, who is older than me, says that I'm not allowed to call it a period piece. So it's just an era that I was not around to witness, but many were. But the 70s and 80s are interesting to me as this countercultural backlash to a lot of the progressive and anti-colonial movements of the 60s. Like on the heels of the civil rights era, you have like Vietnam and Reagan and Thatcher. And so Alice and Peter are coming up in a world where on both sides of the Atlantic, Reagan and Thatcher are in power, and this has seeped into their cultural ideology. So Alice exists in this weird middle period, this awkward transition moment between second and third wave feminism, where most of the material gains for women have been fought for and won by feminists she doesn't know and doesn't acknowledge. So when she's going to school, she can enroll, she can matriculate anywhere, she can vote. Women are at least like nominally represented in most fields. So she is embarrassed by feminists. She finds them hysterical. She thinks they're bra-burning, like radical, like complainers who like are screeching for too long about how they are victims of sexism, when really she thinks you should just keep your head down and do good work and you can hang with the lads. And it's this very neoliberal, self-sufficient, like denial of systemic oppression that she thinks is going to save her. She thinks that's the way out. So she has constructed this cage of belief around her invulnerability to to systemic sexism. And then when terrible things happen to her, because in large part because of her gender, she has no framework for how to deal with it. She doesn't have anybody to turn to. She can't even really admit what's happened to herself, and she has no system for solidarity or support. So yeah, so she's a terrible feminist, and she suffers the consequences.
Yeah, I found her to be just a really conflicted person, but she's also seeking this validation, and that's what I think is so wonderful about this book. All of your books, actually, which seem to be about human longing. The desire for the main character to have someone or something say, "You're okay. You're gonna belong." Would that be an accurate portrayal of most of your main characters? That's their longing? It's okay to say no.
Well, sometimes we had a fantastic conversation with some creative writing and journalism students earlier when somebody asked a great question about how do you, when do you decide your character's desires? And it made me realize I often have a nominal desire at the start of the story that purportedly motivates the character and explains their actions, but typically halfway through the story they realize that was a false desire, or that it was their initial motivation, but it's not going to make them happy. It's not going to leave them satisfied, and there was a deeper, truer desire all along, and that's when the story pivots to something more interesting. So I think certainly in the beginning, most of the characters just want to be a part of the institutions that they crave to be acknowledged by. But by the end of the book, I mean, Robin blows up Oxford, so it can't all be about belonging. Sometimes it has to be about taking down the British Empire.
I think that's one of the beautiful things, actually, of all of your books, where it's almost one of those be careful what you wish for. All of the characters have these unintended kind of outcomes. But I do wonder, back to the validation point, being, at first anyway, feeling like, this is what I want. Was that ever you? You were on that quest of, I need the validation of the academy or a professor or getting a book published or whatever. Was that a little bit about you too?
Yeah, certainly. I grew up as a Chinese immigrant in Dallas, Texas, and there weren't a lot of people who looked like me, so I think I've always grown up feeling a bit on the outside. I was actually bullied quite badly for it in elementary school, but I did not notice. This is like a retroactive observation, because at the time I was just such a bookworm that I was more absorbed in fictional worlds than what was going on around me. So I remember clearly, like, I'd be at recess and kids would be making fun of me, and I would just tune them out because I was reading. And there was also, I remember so clearly, Preston Marks.
Preston, get up here.
But in 5th grade, this boy named Preston, who was as popular as a 5th grader can be, but he and some of the cool boys, they prank called me, and Preston said, "Rebecca, will you go out with me?" And I said, "Ew, no." I really just didn't notice it at the time because I was such a loner bookworm, but I look back and I think, like, oh, I really was on the outside. So I think that's why a lot of my work is about outsiders kind of longing to be a part of this scene that they're just observing as if it's a film or a TV show. And I think when you are on the outside like that, like, you want to chase the shiny prizes because that is a sense of validation. I was chasing scholarships, I was chasing fellowships, and those were all nice, but you discover pretty quickly, like, life can't be about winning things. You get a chance to have all this education, and then you ask, what am I supposed to do with all of this? Like, how do I start sending that knowledge back out into the world? So, very happy not to be that 20-year-old who's just applying for things anymore.
Sure. You know, one of the things I thought was so funny about this descent into hell that Alice goes in. There's one of the rings of hell that is occupied by creative writing students, where they glower at each other in silence and go everywhere in groups. And then there's another ring where the characters are obsessively going over their dissertations, and they know they're never going to get past. But I want to bring up a line from Yellowface related to this, where the main character is talking to her mom about writing. And the mom says, writing isn't the whole world. And the Juniper character says, but writing is the whole world. I want to move people's hearts. I want my books to be in stores all over the world. I want my words to last forever. I want to leave behind a mountain of pages that scream, Juniper Song was here, and she told us what was on her mind. Is that you?
I actually don't think so. I think my motivations have changed over time. When I was earlier in my career, I wanted to be read so badly, especially because when the Poppy War first came out, it wasn't a bestseller. It was actually only this year that any of those books made it onto a bestsellers list. It was The Dragon Republic, infuriatingly, because they released a special edition, and that did quite well, and that was the first time any of those books got on the list, and it had to be that one. But when the books first came out, it was a very quiet launch, and I was kind of sick to my stomach with fear that this was it, like my career was over, I wasn't going to get this chance again, that all this hard work wasn't going to add up to anything, and that my words would kind of sink into oblivion. So I think I really craved the acknowledgement back then, but I think you can't write for fame, you can't write for acclaim. I think these things do not keep you satisfied. I think they're actually quite dangerous to think about too often, if ever. And I think the best thing for a writer is to love it as this atelic activity where it's all about that singular moment between you and the blank page, just the creation of the manuscript. And at this point, what I'm in love with is just the craft. And that's why my favorite book of all the books I've ever written is always the book that nobody's read yet, the book I'm currently working on. Like, I'm happiest in that place where everything's like floating in the air and nothing's set, the book hasn't gone to print, like I'm the only one who's even seen it. Like, I just like the activity of writing, and I'm really blessed with all these other parts of my career, and it's cool to be able to share this with everybody else, but I think you have to love the act itself, otherwise you can't sustain yourself on the external consequences.
This new book is being made into a video, into a series on Amazon. Is that right?
Yes.
So, can we talk about
No.
Did I bring up something I wasn't supposed to bring up?
No, actually, somebody on my production team is here, so...
We never talked about
He'll
it.
report everything to legal if I speak out of turn. What I will say is this. I'm not a screenwriter. I don't know how anything works in Hollywood, and I'm not sure I want to. Like, I like having total creative control over my projects. Like, the whole, like, writing by committee thing and having to seek approval from multiple people. Like, I really admire the people who can create good art that way, but I think I'm just not built for it. So my attitude to all my screen adaptations has always been find a team that you trust, find talent that you trust, and just give them your blessing and let them do whatever they want. It's never been important to me that an adaptation is faithful, only that it's interesting. Because I think, like, if the film or TV adaptation just replicated every beat of the book, like just read the book. But it's a different art form with a different potential, and you have sound and you have image, and you can do so many cool things. You don't have to limit yourself to the original text. So all I'm ever looking for is somebody who has read the book and as a jumping off point and is excited about their own vision. And in Angela Kong, who is the showrunner attached to the Amazon adaptation, I think I really found that. So I trust her to make something really cool.
All right. When can we expect to see something?
I don't know.
Fair enough. Fair enough. What about the discipline that you get into? I think you're a runner, right? So how, and there was a book, Murakami's book on running has influenced you. Why is running part of your writing discipline?
Because it sucks. Running is so hard. And it's just the physical equivalent of writing. Like, when I go out to run in the morning, it's sheer willpower. Nobody is asking me to run. Nobody wants to hear about my running. And this is why runners are annoying, because we just love to brag about our running. There's no point to my running all those miles except that I arbitrarily set this goal and I decided I want to do it. And it's the same with writing. Like, you can come up with a million excuses why you don't want to sit down at your writing desk and just create something out of thin air, and just deciding, like, I have the willpower to, like, brute force my way through this anyways. Like, that feels really, really nice. Like, achieving something for no other reason than you decided you want to. So in my mornings, I get up, I go for a run first because I think you should start your day with the hardest thing possible, because everything else will feel easier. And I think running is the hardest thing possible. So I do my miles, and then I come back and I'm like, oh, this is fantastic. Like, all I have to do is sit around for the rest of the day. And then writing feels easy after that.
It's a pretty good method. So what about advice to writers? We have a lot of writers in the audience, people who are going to be watching this. Do you have any advice for them on just good writing advice?
I have two pieces of advice that I always tell people, no matter at what stage in their writing journey they're on. The first is that the library is a free MFA program. I never did an MFA. I never majored in creative writing. I did have that wonderful experience at Odyssey, but the best thing that even studying with Jean taught me is that good writers are good readers, and you have to learn not just to read a book for enjoyment, but to kind of pick it apart as a series of craft choices. Once you notice that something in the text is compelling you, you step back and ask, how is the author achieving this? And you make a note of that. When I teach my undergrads, I assign them to come into class with 3 wow to how moments in our selected readings. So they mark 3 places in the text where they felt, wow, that's so cool. Like, that exchange of dialogue was moving, or this description was very vivid, or this plot twist was awesome. Just a moment where they were really gripped by the story. Then I asked them to try to unpack the how, like, what were the craft choices here that made me feel that way? And through the close reading, we then extract some general principles of how you write well. And I think this is the only good way to learn writing, because you can talk about craft in the abstract all day long, but unless you're in the weeds, like experimenting with it and seeing other people implement it, they are not going to make any sense to you. So just read all the time, read broadly, read carefully, and make a note every single time you notice something that works. The second piece of advice I always give writers is, and a piece of advice that was once told to me by somebody who I've forgotten, so sorry for the lack of credit, but it's your capabilities as a writer only extend as far as your understanding of other people. I think this is really important because a lot of people choose writing because it's a solitary activity. Like, I'm an introvert, I like to work alone in my office. But if you're just writing about your subjective experience of the world and your experiences, you might have maybe one good book in you, and then I think you run out of observations pretty fast. But to keep writing fiction that builds like a realistic portrait of how people other than you are experiencing this weird, cool world, then you have to be intensely curious about others all the time. And this means going to parties, but it also just means like stepping outside of yourself and asking questions to everybody that you meet, and just being very open to ways of living that aren't your own. So I try to do that as much as I can, and now I'm the weird girl at parties who goes up to people and I'm like, what's your childhood trauma? But yeah, I'm really popular.
What can you tell us about the new book?
Taipei Story?
Uh-huh.
Well, it's almost done. I'm in the last round of revision, so it's very close. It's coming out next September. It's not fantasy, it's literary fiction. It's a coming-of-age story about a college freshman who is studying Chinese abroad in Taipei when her grandfather passes away. And I was studying Chinese in Taipei when my grandfather passed away. And this was very hard for me because the whole point of studying Chinese was so that I could connect with my extended family and learn their stories and really just have like the sort of adult conversations we would have had if I had grown up in China and you know spoken their language earlier. But I was working on that reconnection, but I kept deferring all these conversations to the future because I didn't feel confident in my Chinese yet. And then my grandfather passed away, and now I'll never get that chance. So the book is my way of exploring like what happens if that diaspora return is not possible, and what happens if you can only have conversations and pose your questions to empty space. So I'm very proud of it. It's a sad book, but I think like a very humanist and hopeful book, and a life-affirming book in the end.
Okay, cool. We've got a couple of questions from people who sent questions in. So let me ask you, a reader or one of the people in the audience sent this in. What made you want to write a happy ending for the main couple this time around?
Geez, talk about spoilers.
Okay. Well, you want me to move on?
No, I guess now we know. I got married, and I was finishing the book as we were preparing for our wedding, and I think we went through a pretty terrible time. Bennett and he got very sick.
He almost died.
Yeah, he's doing a lot better now. And the book is like a love letter to him, and it's called Katabasis, not just because it's a literal descent to the underworld, but it's exploring like what lands people in their personal hells, and also how you find the strength to climb out of there. And the book really only came together once we got through that time, and I was just so grateful for it, and so happy to be on the other side where we were looking at the stars together again. So for once in my life, I didn't kill off everybody.
Wow. One person asked, how is the final draft of this book different from the first draft that you wrote?
There's a lot more math in it.
Now, or then?
There's a lot more math in it now, and I'll explain why. In the original draft, there's a scene when Alice and Peter are arguing over their maps of hell. And Alice has a linear map that is just the river as a straight line and the courts in order. And Peter has this map that both of them keep calling the pizza anus. because it looks like it's a circle with wedges and a little circle in the middle. And they're both just convinced that the other's map is nonsense. And in the original draft, the metaphor was that they were both wrong, and just as they are both wrong about each other, about themselves, about Grimes, about life. And then my agent read it and she said, I think this would be a lot more powerful if they were both right but didn't realize it. And I was like, Hannah, that's ridiculous. The maps are incompatible. And she said, not if hell has hyperbolic geometry.
Wait, your editor said that?
She was an English math double major, and she is married to a math professor. So when she decided on my behalf it would have hyperbolic geometry, and then they made me take Zoom math tutoring lessons with her. Okay, like, Hannah and Josh, they would sit my ass down and Josh would be like, here's some homework, like, watch these videos on the Poincaré disk model. And I was like, this sucks. So I went and...
Hold on. Whose book is this? Is it yours or is it hers?
Oh, so it made the book a lot better. So this is what hyperbolic geometry is. I had to study really hard for this, so I need to show off. As opposed to Euclidean geometry, which is our best framework for understanding like our physical space, even though that's not quite right, hyperbolic geometry has removed the parallel postulate. What that means is that given a line and a point above that line, Euclidean geometry, there would only be one possible line that intersects that point, but never intersects our original line. It'd be that parallel line. Hyperbolic geometry, there's infinitely many lines that run parallel to that original line. The upshot of this is very topsy-turvy physical space. There's something called negative curvature, so space looks like a coral or like a Pringle chip, but it means that from within the space, things can look linear, but from without, it can look all like twisted and spherical and weird. So Alice and Peter's maps are actually both completely right, and they don't realize this until later in the book.
They're right, but they aren't compatible, are they?
They are compatible. They're just different representations of the same hyperbolic space from different perspectives.
Yeah, I guess I wasn't paying attention. I kind of wandered off there for a minute.
The last thing I'll say is Babel had like 6 sensitivity readers for language and culture and things. Katabasis had 1 sensitivity reader for math. There's some other cool stuff there about like certain mathematical paradoxes, and that's all thanks to Joshua. So everybody thank the mathematicians in your life.
Wow. So here's my final question, and that is, do you feel like you still need to Google how to write a book?
Well, I don't use Google anymore for that specific question, but we talked about this earlier with the creative writing students as well. I do like starting over with every book and learning a new set of craft guidelines. I would hate to be in the place where I feel like I've mastered everything I can master about craft. And this is why I jump between genres a lot and try out radically different voices from book to book, because I really loved that exhilarating feeling in the beginning when I was Googling what is a plot. While writing The Poppy War, it felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff and I didn't even know how far the bottom was. There were just so many unknowns. It didn't feel safe, it didn't feel predictable, but it felt awesome. And I never want writing to feel boring. Like, I never want to feel like I have a grasp of the thing. I think certain skill levels do carry over, like discipline and just like technical knowledge of like scene construction and sentence construction and all of that. But my writing style differs so much with each project. It really does feel like I'm becoming a writer for the first time to meet the demands of that story, and that is really cool.
Yeah, that is, and actually I lied. I just want to ask you one other thing. There's a Marcus Aurelius quote that means something to you, that has to do with leading a life of ambition. What is that quote, and why is it so important to you?
Well, I don't know which quote you're referring to, but
Do you want me to give it to you?
Yes.
Okay, keep talking and I'll find it.
Well, I can tell you...
Oh, here it is, here it is. Go ahead.
I can tell you a different quote that I think about all the time. Well, when I was on stage in New York, somebody asked me how I deal with like public reception and praise and criticism, and I was reading Meditations for the first time because I realized I'd never gotten to it, and there's a passage that I love. It goes something like this. Are you worried about your reputation? How arbitrary, how capricious those who praise you, the emptiness of those applauding hands, the endless abyss of time swallows all, and how small the space in which all of this happens. So take refuge in yourself, in the back roads of your mind. And I found that very moving because, like, all of this will turn to dust, and to be too concerned about fleeting praise or fleeting criticism would be such a total waste of my short time here. So I'm finding purpose, again, in the atelic activity of creation and just trying to craft a better thing with each novel. And otherwise, there's another part in the Meditations where Marcus Aurelius says, a beautiful thing is not more or less beautiful if you praise it, like its beauty is its own reward. So I think that way about my craft. Like, if the book is good, it's good, and it doesn't matter what anybody else says.
That's way better than what I had. So, Rebecca Kuang, thank you for being at the Writers' Society.